I'm happy to be sitting down here with my Grandpa Ford, who got me started in whitetail deer hunting, and he's sharing a little bit today about his upbringing in northern Minnesota on the Iron Range and some of his beginnings in hunting deer and what he's learned over the years.
We came up to Minnesota from Iowa when I was 5 years old. And we came up in a covered wagon. It was a little more modern. We didn't have horses, but we had a old Ford pickup and we had a four-wheel trailer. And we were jobless. We had no work. My father had been a farmer, and his father lost the farm. He had borrowed money to buy a neighbor's farm, and he had a bad crop, couldn't make the mortgage, and the banker ended up with the farm, and my father ended up with no job. He had no skills outside of farming, and he'd only gone through the 7th grade. So we found out from my mother's half-sister, who was living up in northern Minnesota, and they had moved up the year before because her husband, Clarence Thompson, was unemployed too. And he came up because the iron ore mines were working pretty hard because war had started over in Europe.
Right.
And the United States wasn't in it.
Okay.
But they were supplying war materials to the good guys, the British and the French and the Russians at that time. So she had told us that they had a good opportunity if we would come up and join them, because he had gotten a job, full-time job, good wages, and it looked like they were going to get out of poverty.
Okay.
So we came up with everything we had in this covered wagon. We had our pets. We had my dog. We had a kitten. We had a parrot. We had 2 banty roosters. All the animals that we had.
Loaded
And
them
they
up.
were loaded in the covered wagon with me and my sister, because our pickup only had room for 2 people. It was a small Ford pickup.
So you got to ride up with the animals and your
Yeah,
sister.
so we rode in the covered wagon with the animals, and my father had fixed up a bed over our stove. We had our stove with this cooking stove, and it was right at the end of the covered wagon, and we had a little bed there, and then we had a canvas cover over our so we wouldn't get wet. Well, anyways, that was our start in coming up into deer country.
Right.
Because up in Itasca County, it was all woodland, pretty much all woodland.
Okay.
It was not a farming area. Well, my dad had experience when I was born. I was born up there in 1935, but the folks had moved back to Iowa because the farm was what Dad knew, so he had to go where there was work. But anyways, he only had a shotgun, and I had to carry his old shotgun.
So you get the secondary gun, the
Yeah,
shotgun
so
when
I
you're
had
14.
the shotgun, and you could hit a barn with it. And my first 2 seasons, 14 and 15, I had each year, wonderful chances to shoot a deer.
Yeah.
And I shot with that shotgun, and the deer, all they did is give me their tail, like deer do.
Yeah.
So I was completely unsuccessful. And the year that I was 16, my dad let me use his 30-30 rifle.
Wow.
And he says, now you get up on this tree about 10 feet up there, and there was no stand. It was just a big tree with a limb. And he says, "You sit on that limb." And he says, "I'm going to go out in the woods and see if I can chase up a deer. Maybe it'll come running by you."
Okay. Wow.
And so I got up there and loaded the rifle with 7 bullets and waited, you know, and waited and waited. My dad disappeared, and I wasn't seeing anything. And finally, patience paid off. I could hear a shot way down in the woods, a long ways away from me. It must have been a mile away. And I says, "Well, there's a hunter out there. It's not my dad because I've got the rifle."
Yeah.
And so I started watching down through the woods there, and it was all trees. But I could see about 100 yards down through the trees, and they were like picket fences, popple trees. And I watched in that direction, and pretty soon I seen 2 deer running along. And one was running a little slower than the other ones. So I says, "Boy, that's a long ways, 100 yards and open sights, and they're running." But I says, "Dad says I can shoot that far, so I'm going to try."
Yeah.
And so the deer are running, you try to find an opening there. And I emptied that rifle, all 7 shots, because I was up high, and it took them a while to get out of my range.
Sure.
And it was like my dad on the first time I went hunting with him. The tails disappeared, and I couldn't see anything that had happened. So I waited not very long, maybe 2 minutes, and I got down off the tree, reloaded my rifle,
Yeah.
and I walked over to the direction that the deer had been. And there was just a little light snow, so you could see tracks.
Wonderful.
And I got over there, and by gosh, I found the tracks of this slowest deer. And I started following it. Oh, I probably walked about 100 yards. And here he was, jumping up and down. He couldn't move, and he was still alive, but I had hit him.
Wow.
And knocked him down, and he only went 100 yards.
Right.
And so I give him the coup de grace, shot him in the head, and I had my first deer.
Wow, what a story. Hearing some of those details really makes me appreciate my intro to hunting, because I was given a shiny stainless steel rifle when I was 12 years old from you. So it makes me appreciate my introduction, but you didn't have it easy, but you found a way to be successful.
And you know, you had the opportunity, just like I did as a boy. You got to go along, and I introduced you to deer hunting, showed you what it was all about, shot a deer in front of you, and got you so you didn't like hot chocolate anymore. It was so cold and miserable. And I thought you're never going to go back hunting again after that experience. But my gosh, I think it was only about 2 years later.
My second
and
year.
You had your own gun.
Yep.
And we were together on the stand. Your mother was just a ways away. We couldn't quite see her, but she was over there on a stand, making sure her little chick didn't get lost or cold or needed mothering.
Yeah.
And the same thing happened to us. Right at noon, we heard that shot down in the swamp.
Yep.
And we were watching down the trail, and I says, "I think I hear him coming, Joey." And of course, you wanted to get all steady, and you didn't stand up. You laid down on the stand, and you were fooling around. You didn't have your gun up or anything. Your hat got down in your eyes and you couldn't see, and you had to pull it back, and you were just fooling around. And I could hear thump, thump, thump. I knew that deer was going to come right at us down that trail.
That's right.
And by gosh, he did. And I waited for you to shoot. And you didn't shoot. And that deer was almost on top of us, and he was going to go right by us. And finally, bang, you let it go, and you got your first deer.
That's right. I'll never forget that. It seems like it happened so fast, and I remember taking my hat and gloves off and getting my gun situated and looking in the scope. I just couldn't be quick about it, but we grabbed that deer right by the belt buckle, right up close.
Yeah,
there.
you dropped him right. Oh, he could have been 20 feet from us where you dropped him. That was your start, your introduction. And you've been a pretty avid deer hunter ever since. You've been our old reliable over there, cold weather or not cold weather. I don't know whether you bring a thermos with hot chocolate or...
To be honest, I have never had hot cocoa since, and I never will ever again.
It's just amazing to me that you had the perseverance to go hunting after that first incident, because it was cold that time.
It was,
and we froze our butts off.
That was probably the coldest deer season I've ever experienced, I'd say.
I think it hit 32 below.
I think it did.
Yeah. We were out there and we stayed. You know, I'm a patient deer hunter. We just stayed there until the deer showed up.
And I thought, I'll never sit all day, sun up to sundown. And believe it or not, the past few seasons, I've found some solace in that. I've enjoyed an all-day sit in the stand where I'll put my phone away and I'll just become one with the woods and sit there all day. And I found some benefit to that. I really enjoy it.
And that is the secret of a successful deer hunt.
Okay, that's my first question.
You have to be a very patient person. You have to turn off everything except your ears and your eyes. And if you hear your eyeball click, you're not being quiet enough.
Wow, okay. That's good advice.
That's what I found all the years that I hunted, that you have to be very still. And in my youth, I always heard the deer before I could see them.
Really?
Because I was so quiet. And I didn't have that superior ears, but it was being concentrated on the silence of the moment. And they always surprise you.
Always.
Always. You never, all of a sudden they seem to appear.
You're right.
And the quicker you see them and hear them, the more success you're going to have. Because once they see you or know you there, they have good ears and a good nose. But their ears is what saves them.
Yeah.
They hear just anything because you're in their environment, and they can detect with those big ears any little thing. They can hear when you cock your gun.
That's right.
And you have to respect them because they are a wild animal and they live on their senses.
Absolutely. When you enter the woods and you get up in the stand, it's their world that you're entering.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I taught my cousin to hunt. He had hunted with his stepfather for years, and they just walked the woods, and they get a sight of a deer once in a while, usually the tail, but they could never bag. Neither one of them would ever bag a deer until we taught them to stand and be quiet.
Right.
Then he started getting deer, and he never went walking for after that.
I suppose that's called still hunting, right?
Still hunting.
That requires a certain geography or environment for that to work. But I've found success, like you taught me and your cousin, setting up in a tree stand and being quiet and still.
I learned a different technique from a stepbrother of mine. He was a stalker.
Okay.
And he was a very successful stalker, and he was an avid deer hunter, kind of like Mitch. He really knew the art.
Yeah.
And his technique was to stand still for at least 10 minutes, take 10 steps quietly, stand another 10 minutes,
Okay.
and gradually go through the woods.
Right.
And he would always seem to get close to a deer and get a shot at him.
Is that right?
And he was very successful with stalking.
Okay. Wow. That's
And it was something you could do without a hunting party.
yeah, solo type
Yeah.
of hunt.
Yeah.
And I bet once you get that down, you kind of really get a good circuit.
I
you can
learned to do
move.
that from him, and I was successful several times.
Okay.
But my preferred hunting was complete quiet, don't move at all. But sometimes the deer don't move, and they just lay down.
Yeah.
And stalking is the secret to on those occasions. And sometimes you have to do it. As you know, the deer are a night critter.
Yeah.
They feed at night, they sleep in the daytime, and they are very active for a few hours in the morning, coming off from their grazing areas, cornfields, hay fields, and that's the best time to see them.
Yeah. Right then.
And after you've put in 50 years, Joey, you'll be know how to really hunt deer.
I hope so. So I guess my first question would be, Grandpa, after that wonderful introduction you gave, how many years have you been deer hunting?
There was, from the time I was introduced to deer hunting, I've only missed one season, and that's because it was World War II was going on, and there was no ammunition, and there was no deer season that year. And I don't remember if it was 1943 or 44, but that was the only year that I can remember not deer hunting.
That's incredible. I'm sure there were shortages of a lot of materials and gunpowder and ammo.
There was,
That's it.
and there was a big safety factor back when I first started hunting. There was no requirement to wear scarlet or red clothing. The only requirement was to have a red hat.
Okay.
And when you're hunting brush country, a red hat is not adequate, and there was always hunters killed because they weren't identified. My grandfather had been a deer hunter. He tried hunting deer with that shotgun, and he was trained by 3 natives, my mother's stepbrothers. My mother was raised with these 3 boys, and they were avid deer hunters, kind of like Mitch.
Yeah.
And they went after deer not for sport, but it was to eat.
Right.
That was the thing. Well, anyways, my dad had never been able to shoot a deer with all these experienced guys.
Yeah.
And the shotgun was a close range thing, and it was not a very good weapon to try and shoot a deer with.
Sure.
It's more like a musket. The ball went out, and it was hard to hit a deer with a musket or shotgun.
I bet.
Well, anyways, his experience told him that those 3 brothers all had rifles. Most of them were 30 Winchesters
Okay.
because they were good brush guns,
Right.
and they were very accurate if you were experienced with them. And it was my dad's conclusion that if he was going to go deer hunting, he was going to have to obtain a 30 Winchester.
Right.
That was the tool to do the job.
Yeah.
And he knew we were going to have to eat some meat.
Right. You gotta have some meat.
So when we got up there, and it took him several months. He went and interviewed every mining company up on the Iron Range, all the way from Grand Rapids up to Ely.
Wow.
And it was quite fruitless because he'd go each day and, no, Mr. Ford, we can't use you, you're inexperienced. And so we had to have a place to live at.
Oh.
Because there was my sister and I, we were just little kids. I was 5 years old and she was 9. And we ended up living at a fish camp.
Oh, okay.
It was a summer fish camp where the man there was a friend of my mother's sister. And he said that he had a cabin that we could live at until my dad could find work.
Sure.
And he said he also did some timber work, and my dad could work out the rent by working in the woods with him.
Okay.
Don Shin was his name. So the cabin was 2 rooms. There was kind of a kitchen and a living room, and there was 1 bedroom. And we set up our household there, and it was on Lawrence Lake.
Lawrence
And
Lake.
that's the lake I was born on in
Okay.
1935. And when my dad was out looking for work at these mining companies, my mother and I would borrow Don Shin's wooden boat, and we would fish.
Okay.
We didn't have any real tackle. We just had a green hand line and a daredevil hook.
Wow. So pretty
That was
basic.
that was our equipment. And my mother would row the boat, and we'd follow the weed line, and I would hold on to that green line,
Really?
trying to catch a northern. And of course, the daredevil was a real shiny fish.
Yeah.
You couldn't catch a walleye on it, and you couldn't catch a crappie, but you could catch northern pike. They would go for it. Well, anyways, most mornings after Dad had gone off to look for work, we would, my mother would go out and see if we could catch something for supper.
Yeah.
And it was pretty fruitful because she would row for about a mile to where the mailbox in the road was there. And going along the weed line, I would hook a northern. And we'd pull it in by hand like that, you know. And our biggest problem was trying to get them in the boat because we didn't have a tip net, you know.
Sure.
Well, anyways, we were successful a number of times, and we had fish for supper on those times. And then after we'd been there, I think about 3 months, it was getting towards fall and winter, and things were starting to get cold.
Yeah.
And there was no heater in our cabin.
Oh.
There was no electric lights in our cabin. There was no water in our cabin. We were like on the old frontier, you know. Things were pretty just basic. We had a roof over our head, a bed to sleep in, and ability to get a little food off the land.
So you're living a pretty simple life in those early years.
We had no money.
No money.
No money at all. We were, Dad spent his last money buying gas to get us from Iowa up to Minnesota. So we were about as down on your luck as you could expect.
Yeah.
But you know, Joey, that was some of the happiest times of my life.
I bet.
Because we were a family unit, and we entertained each other, and life was simple.
Simple.
We had time to talk and
That's,
play.
that's
Used to
a
play tinker toys and things like that.
simple. That's a
Yeah,
special
simple life.
time. Yeah.
Well, anyways, get on with the story about deer hunting. My father came home after 3 weeks and he was delighted. He said he's got hired by a mining company in Calumet, Minnesota, which was only about 10 miles from Lawrence Lake.
Okay.
And he says, I start tomorrow.
Oh, wow.
So we had hopes.
Hopes. Yeah.
We had hopes. And my dad worked there, and first 2 weeks he got a paycheck. He had some money.
Yeah.
He went out with that paycheck and bought a 30-30 Winchester rifle.
Wow, right away, his priority.
Right brand new, 1941 model. I still have ownership in that. My son Scott owns that rifle.
Is that right? Wow, that's very special.
He has never hunted with it, but he has that original rifle, and it's in pretty good shape. I'll tell you this, it has provided a lot of meals to my father and family, and later my own family, because I inherited that rifle.
Definitely, that was your main tool for
That was our
getting
main
venison.
tool. Without that, we were out of luck because the shotgun wouldn't do it. Anyways, we got that deer hunting rifle, and that fall, we had meat. Venison.
Yeah, that fall. Wow.
Yeah. My dad was a learner at hunting, but he had the right tool and he had the patience. And when deer season was on, he was out there by himself. Really, he didn't have her brothers were scattered out up in the same country that I was, and it was a grandfather on my mother's side, grandfather Nybeck. He was shot by his companion one deer season.
Terrible.
And it was a terrible accident. He was on a drive. His partner and a couple other deer hunters were on stands. Well, they were on pathways where they could look down. And when my grandfather walked out of the woods, and he could see his partner up the hill about 100 yards away, and bang, the guy shot at him.
Ooh.
He thought he was a deer coming out. And he missed, and my grandfather waved at him,
Yeah.
and he shot a second time and shattered his arm.
Oh, no.
And he almost bled to death in getting out of the woods to the hospital.
That's terrible.
So it was a serious business, and the safety has to be the first thing a deer hunter observes.
That is probably the best advice I've really have ever heard about hunting is safety, because it has come a really long way, but still I think every season there will be a tragic accident in the state
With
of
all
Minnesota.
the safety factors, and it gets any more, Joey, you know that the hunters are almost fully dressed in bright orange anymore, and it's one of the best things that they ever did in safety for deer hunting.
Truly.
And yet hunters get mistaken, and you have to be very careful.
Definitely. That's sound advice. You had a great answer about what makes a good hunter, patience, above that, safety. You talked about the areas you've hunted in. You were in brush country up on the Iron Range in northern Minnesota. I would ask, what is your favorite venison meal?
I'll tell you, Joey, I ate a lot of it, and what I liked was the hamburger mixed with a little bit of beef,
Right.
and it was almost like eating beef,
Wow.
and it
Okay.
was chewy and nutritious,
Yeah.
and that was my preference on the deer.
That's great. I would say mine was probably just growing up and sitting all day out in the stand, sometimes with you, sometimes alone, but you always knew that that Saturday night of opening day, you could get back to the cabin and Grandma would have that great warm feast ready. It might not have had venison, but I surely connect that to venison and deer hunting.
Yeah, she became a very important element of our deer hunting crew because
Good.
she loved being up there in the woods with her husband and her children and her grandchildren.
Yeah.
And she always made a roast beef and a roast pork.
Yeah.
And when we would come in, it would be the greatest meal you could look for.
It would be. Okay, here's a question for you. If you had to pick between walleye fishing or deer hunting, what would you choose?
Deer hunting.
Wow, good answer.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Deer hunting's usually only a couple of weekends in a row, and it's a little bit more exciting to me than catching a walleye.
I have had a change of heart in recent years. I used to be all ice fishing, tip ups and getting out on the ice, and I've now come to understand more the importance of the deer season and just how appealing and exciting it is.
You know, I found out over the years, I used to hunt with Bob Benoit, my best friend, and we hunted deer a couple times together, but he lived far away from me, and we would get together in the fall to do pheasant hunting. And what pheasant hunting did for you, you didn't have to be quiet and wait. You went out in the court and chased them up, and you got a lot of shooting.
Sure.
Deer hunting, you only going to get one shot. You have to make use of it, and you may spend 40, 80 hours on a stand to get that one shot. And when you do it, you have to assume it's like the old days with a musket. You're not going to get a second one. You got to make that first one count.
Honestly, yeah. By the way, I'm sorry to hear about your friend. I'm sure you honored him, Bob Benoit, up at Bowstring pretty well this past trip that you
Yeah,
had.
his son drove me out in a boat right out in front of our cabin, and we poured his ashes on the lake.
Wow.
And I had a bottle of champagne, and I gave him his last drink.
Oh, wow, that's really nice. That's a
Yeah.
great
Yeah.
tribute to him. Wonderful. In your words, what is a successful hunt?
Well, a successful hunt is when it's a nice fall day and it's fairly pleasant to be out in the woods and you can smell the moisture
Yeah.
and you are rewarded with your patience by bagging a deer.
Yeah. That sounds like success to me.
Yeah.
What do you think about modern deer hunting today and all of the technology that's now available, such as those cameras I like to use? A lot of hunters will have lightweight titanium deer stands and digital mapping tools. What's your opinion about that technology that exists?
Well, I think it's just like the early times when Indians had to use spears. They learned to use bow and arrows. White men came over and taught them muskets. Technology improves the sports and is more humane in bagging the deer. And I see nothing wrong with using the best technologies, short of using a machine gun. I think that is too much.
Right.
But automatic rifles, I see nothing wrong. And I admire you for bagging deer with a bow and arrow.
Well,
That's
thank
something
you.
I would never try.
That means a lot. I'm almost reverting in my technological tools. I like the challenge and the appeal. And a big thing happening in modern hunting is a lot of hunters are going back to the basics of archery and trying to be as simplistic as possible.
I think that's true, and I think that's very good. And I just like a deer hunter who's out there not to waste the deer. Deer is a precious animal, but makes use of him that God provided. He was a source of food.
Absolutely.
And with that attitude, I've known people who would shoot a deer and leave it laying on the ground, and I don't like that.
I agree. My friends Mitch and Jake, they're very avid hunters. They both have taught me so much about archery hunting, scouting, all of it. But I would say a majority of the protein meat that they eat comes from venison or wild game because they're such good hunters. They'll fill 2, 3, 4 tags a season.
Yes.
And like your upbringing, if you filled a tag, you had meat for that year ahead. But that's great.
I have some friends that I know up at Pine City, and these fellows are avid deer hunters. They grow a field of corn every fall so that their old father has a hunting ground and can bag a deer without walking in the woods.
Yeah.
And they have a house there, a farmhouse. They don't live in it. They just have it for deer hunting
Right.
with this acreage. And I've been in their house, and every wall has massive deer hunting trophies from their hunts.
Wow.
And every time I see them, the first thing they ask me, "Did you get your deer last year?" And they hunt because they eat their venison,
True.
or they bring it to family members, and they don't waste the deer at all.
Definitely. That's good practice to do. That sounds like a nice deer camp they have.
Yeah, it's the avidness of a deer hunter to have a place just for deer hunting
Yeah.
that they own and can have a assured place for their old dad to hunt on.
Yeah. That's good. That's good practice. Well, one of my final questions for you. What are your hunting goals for this season ahead?
Well, last year I changed my deer hunting spot, and I don't walk very good anymore, so I can't go out and chase deer. And I have to be within a couple of city blocks of a car to get there and back. But this year, I've got my spot all picked out. There's a tree stand, or a tree that I can put my stand on. And your mother always comes with me and gets me set up.
Yeah.
And Scott comes along once in a while to make sure I'm up there.
Yeah.
And I'm going to go on this spot that I picked out last year. I know if the conditions are right, there's going to be deer coming there because you have a snowmobile trail and you have a deer path that comes together. And you wait there long enough and you're going to get some action. Last year it was so warm we got no action. In fact, I only saw one buck last year, and he was over where I used to hunt in the stand. I could see where he was because I couldn't get a shot out. And I thought, if I'd have stayed on my old stand one more year, he was 20 yards away from where I normally stood.
That's how it always seems to work out.
But I'm going to go to the new spot this year, and I'll probably only hunt opening weekend, and I'm looking forward to it.
Me too. If you have some luck, I will gut and drag your deer for you.
Oh, I
Count
like
on
that.
Yeah.
Because I can't drag deer anymore, and I have to depend upon Scott Ford to do my hauling, because he's always close by me, in the same woods anyway.
Right. Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Grandpa Ford. I really appreciate it. I would say out of all the hunters I know, number one, you've taught me the most, but number two, in Minnesota whitetail hunting, you probably have the most vast experience over time out of anyone that I'm aware of. So your answers and tales are vital for others to learn from.
The secret is, Joey, I'm 89 years old, and I've been hunting for over 70 years.
Yeah, true.